Well, delighted to have you all with us. I think this one is going to be very interesting to a lot of people. So the topic for today is all about how to get the best way of getting to accessibility compliance in 2023. As I say, compliance is one of those terms that comes quickly after accessibility for a lot of people. A lot of people are desperately trying to get to a level because they need it for government contracts. They are part of government, and so it's one of the things that is required of them. All of these sorts of things mean that accessibility compliance is something that a lot of people get fixated on. We're going to try and give you a much more sort of interesting view of this, other than just how do we get to that point, because actually there are some things about compliance that we need to open up for you to make this just a lot more human. The other thing to say is we're going to be looking at three aspects of this. So what your aim should be. So should it be WCAG 2.1 AA, for example? That's what everybody in UK government is required to do. But is that right for the organisation that you work for? We're going to be looking at that. We're going to be looking at how you test best to see if you're on the right way to that. A lot of these things can take a while to actually achieve. So what is the best way of checking to see how well you're doing? And the key thing about all of this stuff really is that people with disabilities, people who have access needs, they don't need your test results. What they need you to do is to actually fix stuff. And so we're going to be looking at how to make sure that the test isn't the aim that you have, but actually something that really works for people. So I hope this is going to be of great use to you today. My name is Jonathan Hassell. I'm CEO of Hassell Inclusion. I've been doing this accessibility thing since 2001, so 22 years now. My emphasis is very much the strategic side of things. I was trying to give you an example, 400 different websites and multiple mobile apps to be as accessible as possible when I was leading this at the BBC. So strategy about how to do this at scale is, if you like, my bag, and the sort of thing that I contribute to clients and anybody who will listen around the world. With me, I've got Yac. Yac, do you want to introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. So welcome, everyone. Thanks for attending. My name's Yac for short. Just behind Jonathan, I've been doing this for about 21 years. Massively focused on user-centric journeys. I've got a background in customer service, and my skill set is in bringing people together, collaboration, user-centered design, and hopefully making things work for everyone.
Great, thanks, Yac. So, as I say, if you think of me as Mr. Strategy and Yac in terms of how to do this in a much more sort of technical, sort of tactical way for things, you're not far off the difference between the two of us. So let's jump in. So the first thing we wanted to talk about is, what should your aim be when it comes to accessibility? And for most people out there, they think that accessibility is just one thing. These days, it's WCAG 2.1 AA. That's the set of guidelines that you need to go with, obviously, because that's what everybody uses. It's not necessarily the case. So we have a lot of different types of products that you might be creating. You may be creating a website. If it is a responsive website, then 2.1 AA is a really great aim to have. But to give you an example, if you are creating something that is just going to be used in offices for your staff, actually some of the things in 2.1 AA you may not necessarily need. So if you're doing something desktop only, 2.1 AA would be fine. If you're doing native apps for mobile phones, whether that's Android or iOS, then you're going to need to bring in some more. So if you like, the compliance that you might want to be getting is not just with WCAG, but things like the Apple guidelines and the Android guidelines for accessibility. If you're going beyond the web, then you also need to bring in more. For example, you may be doing your user journeys on your sites, and you're going to be seeing this as a theme all the way through. A lot of the time when people are using your digital technologies, you'll be sending them emails, you'll be sending them PDFs. Potentially, you may even be kind of giving them printed materials. And so sometimes you actually need to go beyond WCAG for those. So there are different guidelines if you're doing stuff, for example, for print media or for broadcast. And then the last category here is you might be doing something cool and specialist. So if you were with us last last month, you would have seen me talking about the metaverse. And so we're doing lots to try and actually create the guidelines for how you would create an experience in the metaverse which really works for everybody. WCAG won't give you everything you need. So if you're trying to get accessibility working well there, you would need to go beyond it. And I wanted to give you another example. So WCAG, it's really good, but it's not everything. That's, if you like, the kind of like what we're talking about in this first thing. If you, for example, are autistic, a lot of your needs aren't actually sort of captured in WCAG when they were putting together those standards. Some things they regarded as being just a little bit too hard. And so the needs of all people with disabilities aren't captured in there. WCAG are trying to improve that, but for the moment, you need to look at other places as well. So for example, a couple of years ago, we created guidelines for the National Autistic Society. Obviously, it's really important for them that people who are autistic were able to use their site. They couldn't find what they needed in WCAG, so we did a lot of research to try and understand that from real people who are autistic and put that together. Just gives you an idea that it's not always, if you like, the obvious kind of WCAG answer in terms of aim. So I'm going to hand over to Yak now. He's going to take us through, if you like, how some of these things kind of play out in his experience. And we're going to be starting to introduce something we call live audits and how all of that works. So Yak, over to you. I've got these slides. If you just tell me when to move them on.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jonathan. So yeah, what we're going to do is, like Jonathan mentioned, look at things above and beyond WCAG and also look in a bit more detail at WCAG itself. So WCAG is a great starting point, but it shouldn't be the only aim. This slide shows you how there are several different standards available. So the service standard on the left, as I'm looking at things, is something that's in UK government, and it factors in understanding users and their needs, solving a whole problem, and providing a joined up service. As Jonathan's mentioned, there are several customer touch points along a journey. And if you're only focused on WCAG in a website, you may be missing important things like emails, PDFs, phone calls, and third-party content. So if we just move to the next slide, Jonathan. Just thinking about WCAG compliance, it's actually very hard to do. People underestimate the amount of work required. So this is a quote from the W3C, the people who write WCAG, and they're talking about the techniques against each success criteria. So although you can use their techniques, there are multiple ways of doing things. A lot of the WCAG criteria are open to interpretation and are ambiguous. So just following those as a checklist isn't necessarily the right thing to do. It will get you so far, but what you really need to do is think about the user journey, user research, and collaboration with people. The best way to do accessibility is early and often, but also to collaborate and talk to people. It should be a discussion as opposed to a checklist. Next slide, please. And again, talking about compliance, these are some of the things that the W3C themselves are understanding. So when we move to things like WCAG 3 or Silver, there's a lot of challenges with conformance. So I've been auditing for about 15 years, showing my age now, thousands upon thousands of sites I've tested. But some of my colleagues who have done it for as long would disagree with me on whether something passes or fails. So trying to be black and white, trying to say yes or no to something is extremely difficult. And what we need to do is try and get past that and to think more about what we're trying to achieve. We're trying to do something for people. We're trying to get them to a point to complete a journey. So although WCAG has lots of strengths, there are some things we need to be aware of as we progress through those journeys.
Sorry, there we go.
Thank you. Even if you get to what you would call full WCAG compliance, there can still be problems. So for UK government, the compliance is normally WCAG 2.1 AA. But what that means is you're not necessarily factoring on some demographics. So sign language is normally in AAA WCAG compliant. So on the left of this slide, there's a picture from the Guardian newspaper, and it was to do with the COVID briefings in the UK. So someone who used sign language found that that wasn't catered for them. They took government to court and were successful. And the example we've got on the right is, again, thinking about customer touch points. So a student couldn't fill in a form, which was a PDF, for a loan. Now, the site was fully accessible, but what people hadn't scoped out in the testing and the WCAG compliance was all the other customer touch points. So a PDF, which was attached to a website, wasn't accessible. That meant someone couldn't get a student loan. And then they struggled with the entire journey. So just looking at WCAG checkpoints in a, I suppose, checklist form and just scoping out a website sometimes isn't enough. We need to go further than that. And this is just showing you some of the increases that people file for websites not being accessible, but it's not just websites. Although this mentions websites, a lot of my experience in UK government and when we're working with private sector organisations are things that attach to this. So you can have a website where someone can buy a ticket, but then if there's a requirement for someone to print that ticket, to show it on a train or to use it on a plane, that can be a problem. If someone has to take ID into a bank after they've used a website to sign up for an account, how accessible is that journey to them? What if someone needs to ring you? How accessible is your phone line as opposed to your website? So what we're trying to do here is make you aware that it's a journey, it's a collaboration, and not just about compliance.
Thanks, Yak. And that particular point there is really kind of key when it comes to what people want from digital. Accessibility is just one level of what we would term accessibility experience that people need. In general, we were trying to capture this sort of thinking in the international standard ISO 30071 Part 1 that I led the creation of a while ago. And effectively, we came up with 3 levels of accessibility experience. So the technical experience is one that complies with things like WCAG. But as Yak was saying there, the most important thing for people is, can they actually do the thing that they came to the website or app or whatever the product is to do? And actually that brings in a lot of usability things as well. So usability standards have been there for ages. So what we did was we pulled these together. And so we have these 3 layers: technical, which is, yes, it passes, is WCAG; effective and efficient, which is actually people can do those complete user journeys that they would come to the product to do. And satisfying is the sort of thing where it's kind of like, this is a really great experience that I would recommend to my friends. This is a better experience, if you like, than other websites. These are the sorts of levels that you can go to, and you can choose which aims you would go for. So, and the idea is, say, for example, you are creating a game that is designed to be fun, that needs to have a satisfying level of user experience. If a game is able to be used, but it's not fun, it's not a game. So really important for you to be thinking about, if you like, how to get equity. If you're going for something which is really cool and interesting for people who don't have a disability, actually, are you giving the people with a disability the same level of experience, if you like? Now, sometimes that can be hard. So one of the things that we advise people in is how you can do things that we're going to be talking about when we're talking about how you test things. The key things, when people come to your website, there are probably some key things that they really want to do, what we term the core user goals. For example, if I was going to a video on demand site, the core user goals is, I need to find a program and watch it. Non-core goals would be, once I've done that, being able to tell my friends that I enjoyed it. If you can't do everything for everybody and make everything as good as possible for accessibility, you might want to give the core user goals a higher aim than the others. And then there are some occasions when you actually can't do things for everybody. To give you an example, YouTube cannot be WCAG compliant. It cannot even reach WCAG 2.0 single A compliance that we've had for years. What am I talking about? Well, actually, WCAG requires you to have audio description on videos that need it. And unfortunately, it's impossible for YouTube to deliver that all of the time, because I can just upload a cat video onto YouTube whenever I like, and I don't make it with audio description. So I'd have broken the accessibility of YouTube. That's just one example of how this stuff can be actually a lot harder depending on the type of product that you've got. So there is a couple of things that you need to think about when you're setting your aims, really. There are, it's not just WCAG, because the question is, how much will it cost you to get there, and how should that kind of play into your thinking? For example, if you are looking at the tools that you are procuring for your teams, so websites that they're using all of the time to do their jobs, most of the time those are not WCAG compliant at the moment. There's two reasons for that. The first reason is the company didn't ask for it. The second thing is that if they did ask for it, that product, that software as a service, might not already be accessible. So it may not be actually in your command, if you like, to make sure that all of the solutions, all of the tools that you have for your teams are going to be accessible. It might be harder for you to do this than you think. The other thing is it's going to cost you money. So these different levels of accessibility have different costs with them. To test against WCAG, you're talking about 5,000 at least for most different products. We're going to look at automated testing. Those tools can be really expensive as well. If you're doing testing with people, so user testing, it's normally a minimum of 10,000. So again, each of these things has a different cost associated with it. The other thing is, as we'll go on to at the end, you don't just want to be testing these things, you actually want to be getting these things right. So how easy is it for your teams to be able to get to the aim of accessibility that you've got? We were helping one of our clients think about this a while ago, and none of their teams knew how to do this. So it was the cost of all of that training, but also the cost of keeping the training up to date that was also part of this. So there's costs, but there's also a lot to win. And so, for example, we help people understand what they can win from accessibility. We have a benefits workshop that will enable them to understand exactly why they, as a particular company, could win things. For example, if you are a software as a service company, if you make your product more accessible, you can sell it to more companies. If you are a government department and you make your website more accessible, more people can use it rather than having to go on phone lines or to the town hall. These sorts of differences are really important. And if you are thinking about the benefits, you won't just think, okay, we need to make sure it's WCAG compliant. You'll be making sure that people can actually use it. The other thing is, it's entirely possible that the thing that will really motivate you is to see what your competitors are doing in the market. So if a different alternative product to yours is really accessible, that might be the thing that kicks off the kind of the push to make things accessible. That sort of thing is really helpful. So the way we tend to think about things is, you've got all of these options for the level of accessibility experience and the type of WCAG guidelines you've got, and these play out in different ways for the different products that you have in the organization, whether or not they're for your customers, your staff, whether they are of primary or secondary importance to you, and whether or not they're things that you created or an agency or a vendor. All of these things, in a good way of thinking about this strategically, should be playing into the way you think about compliance. Hopefully that all makes sense. So let's move on to the next bit. So you've been trying to kind of set your aim. Okay, you've got an aim now. How do you know if you're getting there well? Well, there are loads of tools out there that can help you. This is one of those tools. We've taken all the branding off because there's a number of tools that can help you get a score for how accessible your site is. So is that the best way of doing it? Or maybe something like this, where you've got some sort of compliance logo logo from a company. So the problem with the one on the left is it doesn't test everything, as we'll see. The problem with the one in the middle is it doesn't last long. Your site's compliance with WCAG can be knocked out by another person creating a new page on your site that isn't compliant. That means that whatever badge you had on there is no longer valid anymore. Or people were asking us to talk about overlay systems, what we thought about them. This is an example of one of those. You can sign up with a company that says, we will take your compliance issues away. You don't need to be good at accessibility. We'll fix it all for you so we can make you compliant just as long as you pay us. Unfortunately, as a lot of lawsuits in the States, over 600 last year, will attest to, this really doesn't work and it doesn't give you the level that you want. So these things are not necessarily the answer. The answer, I believe, starts with this, that says, how are we actually planning? If there are lots of different ways of testing for accessibility out there, what is the most efficient way of doing this for us as an organization for the products that we're creating? Because there are loads of different methodologies. This is a plot of some of those on a chart. They have different costs associated with them. They have different reliabilities of the finding, you know, whether or not they actually help you know that this is really going to work for compliance or to enable people to use things. So we haven't got time to look at all of these today, but we wanted to talk about one that is ours. We think we're the only people on the planet doing this. So I'm going to pass over to Yak now, who's going to talk us about live audits and why we created them. Yak, over to you.
Thanks, Jonathan. So as Jonathan's mentioned, there's lots of different ways to test. Now, I've worked with several accessibility companies over the years, and we've done some in-depth research with some of our partners looking at why accessibility hasn't improved, even though people are doing lots and lots of audits. So as these slides show you, you can test with automated tools. They can find, say, 30% of WCAG, and you can test against WCAG. But some of the compliance, as we've seen before, is difficult to define. WCAG is great, but it's very, very complex. And what it doesn't do is join those user journeys together. It also, in some cases, doesn't educate people. It doesn't help them improve their knowledge of accessibility and how people with disabilities use the web. So with lots and lots of research, with lots and lots of companies, what we've done is try to work out a better way of doing this, something that increases awareness, something that educates people, and something that gives you, let's say, that realization of how you can do things differently. So if we move on, Jonathan. So what we're trying to do with live audits is effectively create something that's flexible, that's very, very targeted on the end-to-end journey of what customers are actually doing. So there's subsections of WCAG, and there's lots of standards that talk about what are called barrier walkthroughs. And the idea of a barrier walkthrough is it's what are customers actually doing. So rather than test things in silos, you're thinking about how someone gets to a place, what they're doing while they're in the middle of a journey, and a deliverable. So things like PDFs, emails, phone calls, in some cases, social media as well, documents. And what we're going to do with a live audit is do that face-to-face in real time with an organization. That session's recorded, people are there collaborating, asking questions. And it's eye-opening when we do these, because people then get a view of what WCAG is. They are shown demos of assistive technology. So I will demonstrate screen readers, magnification, dyslexic software. We'll do things like color changes, resize things, turn style sheets off, and so on. We'll use mobiles, desktops, and different browsers to show how different users may navigate and interact with their site. So what we do is we focus on, say, 3 user journeys during the session, and they're prioritized. We flex those according to the organization. We look at things like analytics and metrics. So we're testing like for like. We're trying to work out how your users get to the site. Is it through a Google search? Is it on the home page? Are people coming from social media? So we're not doing things in silo. We shouldn't create an abstract report that doesn't factor in the needs of your audience. Now, this is something that WCAG 3 is adopting with Silver. If anyone's read the draft, it's very, very focused now on user journeys as opposed to WCAG compliance, because WCAG compliance by itself even if you score 99%, let's say, doesn't necessarily tell you if someone can do something. It also doesn't tell you how usable something is, going back to Jonathan's slides. Technically, you could have 1,000 links on a page. You could get to each one of those. That would be WCAG compliant, but it would be extremely frustrating and difficult for someone to get to. So the live audit is an education piece. It's an awareness piece. And what it's trying to do is teach people skills so they can think slightly differently. So as this slide shows, we're demonstrating issues. All of that's recorded and people take notes as we go along. They can stop, they can ask questions. We can demonstrate good and bad examples of compliance. Sometimes when you get a standard audit report, it's very difficult to know what to do next. But in a live audit, we can stop, we can show you an example of something working, we can change code, so you can see how that would affect different user groups. You can ask questions not just of WCAG, accessibility in general. You can ask questions of how different disabled people will do things. So I have friends and family who are disabled. I've worked with lots of disabled users, training them in assistive technology. So we can give you the benefit of that experience. And also we can discuss what we can fix, what we can prioritize, and in some cases, what we may need to work around. We can look at things like accessibility statements. We can look at things like reasonable adjustments and make sure you're prioritizing things so you get most bang for your buck. We can talk to developers and we can layer how we're doing things to get the most from those sessions.
That's good. So thanks, Yak. As I say, there'll be a little bit more in terms of how that kind of helps you in the fix part coming in a little bit. But if you want a full demonstration of this, we actually did, so March 2021, almost 2 years ago now. It seems like yesterday. But Yak and I actually did one of these sessions wholly on live audits. As I say, if that sounds like it might be of help to you, then please seek that out on HiHub. So, yeah. Automated testing still has a place, and people were asking for me to talk about this when they were signing up for the session. So that key thing is that automated testing is great for about 30% of WCAG. It doesn't really do much more than that at the moment. AI is coming along to make things better, but it's still not to the level where it can get anywhere near all of WCAG. So here's a little bit of a kind of cheat sheet if you're looking for an automated testing solution. There are loads out there. We haven't got a huge amount of time to talk about them today. The thing that I would encourage you to do is to look at the difference between what's here on the on the left, and what's here on the right. So on the left, we've got tools that are really, really good for developers. So if you are creating code, templates, all of these sorts of things, if you're creating interactions, user journeys, that sort of thing, then things like sort of Tenon, sort of Axe, all of the DQ set are really, really good. Here on the right, we've got things that have already been sort of, I think, probably in a lot of people's minds, things like Site Improve, SilkTide. These are tools that oftentimes don't just test for accessibility, they test other things as well in terms of spelling and all of these sorts of things, if you like. They're quality tools, but they're quality tools for content. They're really, really good at doing that, but they're not good at doing everything. And it's worth kind of noting, we had one gentleman that I was talking with who had actually used some of these tools to test a number of different websites. And he said, okay, these ones are really good because they pass well in Wave and Site Improve and things like this. These are really bad because they don't. What he was actually testing was 30% of WCAG, and that 30% was all the things that are to do with content creation. There are things like, did you miss one alt text on an image? Did you miss your headings right? All of those can be picked up really easily by those tools. So if you've got a content-heavy website, chances are you've got things wrong in those sorts of areas. So the tools tell you that the sites are bad. They don't tell you anything about the 70% that they can't test. So actually, he thought that the worst websites in the country were media websites. It wasn't the case, but actually those were the content-heavy sites that these tools could look at. So it's worth bearing in mind that these are not enough on their own. What is a really good thing to do, especially if you have a team who are doing lots of quality assurance as products are created, is to train your QA testers. So the key thing here is that the cost of fixing an issue depends on when you find it. That's a truism from project management. And so it's really good to make sure that you can actually find issues as things are being created, rather than waiting until like a week before launch. And it's amazing how easily you can kind of train QAs. Here's a quote from, we actually went over to China to train some people in a bank over there. Before the course, I was a bit in awe of accessibility auditors. Now I know our QAs can do this too, and we can have a bigger impacts than the auditors do. That's real. It's so important. It's not saying that QA testers are better than auditors, but QA testers, if they work with the teams when they're creating the products, can actually find all sorts of problems when it's much easier to fix them. Auditors are great, but you don't actually need to wait until a product is ready for audit to actually do this sort of stuff. Just to give you an idea about how easy some of WCAG can be to test, this is one test from our audit training. So this is bypass blocks. So these are the skip links that you would see at the top of pages. All you need to do is to go to a website and press tab, and keep on pressing tab and see if a skip link comes up. If a skip link doesn't come up and you've got to the end of the page, it fails. If one comes up, press space or enter and see if you can actually use it to jump down through the page. If it works, it passes. That, in less than half a minute, is how to test one of the aspects of WCAG. Some things are really easy, some things are incredibly difficult, but getting the easy stuff done by your QA testers can be really helpful. For the rest of them who really want to go deep into auditing, this is an example of what happens when people come on our audit training. This is from Dominic Plummer, who's the head of performance engineering at NatWest. We didn't have any capability internally for test for accessibility in the past. We relied on external audit. After putting 12 people through Hassell Inclusion's accessibility audit training, they all passed their auditor exam and are now operational on projects across NatWest. This is the really key bit. To check how they were doing, we did a comparative test a month or so after their training, getting them to audit the same site as our external auditors. They all found the same things as the external experts because of the training. That is the mark of good training. The impact of it means that they didn't need to actually send everything to outside experts all of the time anymore. This is possible. So it's worth bearing it in mind. If you're doing lots of audits, if you're spending loads of money on this sort of stuff, it might be better to actually train up some of your people. I promised I'd mention something about task-based user testing, because this is the thing that's needed to get to that effective and efficient level of testing that people can actually use the website to do what they want. And the key thing here is that it can be quite expensive, but you can actually include it in your existing usability testing if you're doing any. One of the key things that I did when I was at the BBC was to help all of our usability people test things with people with disabilities as well. Some of them were a bit nervous at the start, but actually it gave us great ability to really ensure that all of our products, when they went out, were able to be used by people with disabilities. So if you're already doing usability testing, this is a really good way of actually getting it efficiently into the way you're doing things. And people are asking sort of like when to do different types of testing. I'm just going to give you this in a real kind of snapshot, but if you want a lot more, it's on our training. The key thing is to test it against guidelines first, then to test it with people and assistive technologies. And then once you've got loads of content in your product, that's a great point where the automated testing works. And you can do automated testing throughout development and get those QAs on the line. That's a little kind of snippet from what we do to help product managers actually get accessibility testing into their strategies in an efficient way. If you'd like any more, please let us know and we can bring that training to you. So the last bit is all about what's the best way of fixing things. So we're going to do this in two ways. Yak's going to talk about how it works from his experience of doing things on individual products for people, and I'm going to take it strategic afterwards. So Yak, over to you.
Thanks, Jonathan. So we've mentioned live audits, and this slide is just going to break down some of the purpose of that and how we do that. So we could think of this as, let's say, awareness, consolidation of knowledge, and then realization. So audit reports often give you lots of information, but it's difficult to understand the context of what's being told. And another thing that's really, really important is people can misinterpret reports. It's a very, very abstract thing. The person who's done the audit report probably doesn't know your system or your users. Everyone on this call is an expert in their own organization, much better than I am. The way live audits work is I will give you awareness. I will ask you questions about why you're doing things. And with that knowledge, you can then create solutions that are targeted towards your audience, much better than me being in a room for 2 weeks, writing a report and then saying, do X. I don't know anything about your audience, your campaigns, your videos, or your social media. So that collaboration is key. Once we've gone through that process, people often are more confident to talk about things, to try new designs. So going back to what Jonathan's talked about shifting left, people will then show new designs and say, well, we are thinking of doing X. Can we do that? And definitely we can look at designs, we can look at prototypes, and we can factor in accessibility, assistive technology, and reasonable adjustments to that. Another thing we do in the live audits, which is key, is think about things above and beyond WCAG again. So digital inclusion is a massive factor. We can't just say, here is a website. We need to think about people who are vulnerable, people on low bandwidth, people on pay-as-you-go mobiles. We need to think about assisted digital, people's IT literacy, and the live audit factors all of that in. If you've made certain assumptions about your users, for example, they know how to click on something, they know how to copy and paste text, they know how to set user accounts up, you may find people aren't doing things in the way you expect. Another thing we do is think a lot about analytics. So there are multiple ways that you can fix things. A quick example is, say, descriptive links. You could add screen reader text, you could add ARIA labels, but that's not going to work for everyone. It won't work for voice recognition users. It won't work for magnification users. It won't work for people who have certain things turned off. So there are ways to factor fixes in that work for a majority of user groups as opposed to just one. And what the live audit does is try and challenge your thinking. So the last picture here is people not being able to see the wood for the trees. Sometimes you're so engrossed in your design, you haven't considered outside views. And one of my jobs in the live audit is to challenge your thinking, to make you think outside the box. I don't like the term lateral thinking, but it's to get you to think in ways that your users may, to ask why you've used certain labels, to why you haven't done necessarily user research with people with disabilities. And once you've got that knowledge and confidence, it will then let you innovate and come up with even better solutions, which will drive, obviously, customers. It will drive usability as well.
Thanks, Yak. So yeah, really important to be thinking about those fixes and how to do that in the context of where you are. What about if you're doing this at scale? So we work with lots of organizations who have, tens of products, hundreds of products. When I was at the Beeb, I had, as I say, 400 websites that we were trying to make accessible all at the same time. So how do you do that? And so some sort of insights in terms of how to do this at scale in case there's anybody with those sorts of challenges on the call. This is one of the other things that I think those overlay systems kind of completely miss. And I just wanted to kind of note on this, because even if they could fix everything so that you don't need to get good at accessibility, you just pay them. How long will you need to pay them for? So, if it's an overlay system, you would need to pay them forever. Literally, the accessibility of all of your websites and everything that you have is all at the mercy of this overlay company. And that's not what you would do if you really cared about accessibility. It's certainly what you wouldn't do if you were thinking about security or data privacy or anything like that. It's kind of like, oh, don't worry, we can just give that to some people over there and they would sort it. You know, the problem with a lot of the thinking behind overlays is that they want you to be dependent on them. Hopefully what you can see in this thing is that whilst we have mentioned some Hassell Inclusion products and services and things, our value system at Hassell Inclusion is that we want to empower you. Even our testing mechanisms like live audits are all about, you know, once you've done a few of these, you may be able to do a lot of this stuff yourself because you've seen us doing things, or we've trained you in how to do things yourselves. Getting good at this stuff is a great way of scaling. It means that you actually start getting good rather than being at the mercy of a vendor who, if you stop paying them, will stop your accessibility just like that. So what we like is for organizations to get mature in this, and that's what we're about. And so part of that is doing this, because the key thing that I want you to get from this is, what are you fixing? Most people who've had an audit done think that the thing that they are trying to do is to fix their product. What they miss is that they should be trying to fix the team who made that product so that they get it right in the future, because every product goes through loads of different versions. So if you do a version of your product and you fix the product and then you do a new version of the product, you're going to get everything wrong again. And so you're going to need to fix it again. And that's not good enough. That's just not efficient, especially if you're in a large organization. That could cost you millions of dollars. You have to fix the people who made the problems, not just the results of their lack of capability. So I'm going to talk us through a few different ways of kind of thinking about this. The first one is kind of the obvious one. Say, for example, you've got 3 products. They've all had an audit. We've actually done this recently for one of our clients that have multiple brands, and they want to make sure that they're all accessible. Those audits will come up with issues that the designers need to fix, the content authors need to fix, and probably a huge number that the developers would need to fix. So a normal way of doing this would be siloed by product. So you say to the designers who work on product 1, can you fix these things? You say to the designers who work on product 2, can you fix these things? And none of these people talk to each other. So yes, the products get fixed, but the learning, if you like, the designers, the content authors, the developers have to go through to be able to do those fixes is just in those silos. A much better way of doing things, and a much more efficient way of doing things, is to go the other way across, which is to say, if you've got more than one product, train up some people on how to fix this thing and then get them to do it across all 3 products. And do that for the designers, do that for the content authors, do that for the developers. It could be that the quickest way, if you've got multiple products to get through to compliance, is to say, if there are loads of problems that the developers need to do, then we're going to train some of our, this group of developers to be really good at fixing components, this group of developers to be really good at fixing structure of pages. And then we're just going to let them do that across all of the products. That is a much quicker way of getting you to where you want to be if you are desperate to get to compliance as quickly as possible, which a lot of companies are. An even better solution is what we call the cross-pollination one, which is, say, for example, if we just take those 2 instances with the developers, you've got one team who is fixing components, one team is fixing page structure. After you've done, say, for example, you've got 2 people in each team, a better way of doing things is the first time you are trying to work out how to fix something, those 2 people will work together as a pair. And once they've worked it out, then one of that pair can go off and take that learning to a different team. So literally they can swap across. so that the people who started on components actually learn how to fix them, and then train the people who started on structure, and vice versa. You can see how this stuff really makes a difference. And if you've got lots of products, this is so much better than the rest. So that's one way of looking at it in terms of how to fix your capability. But the other thing is that you may be desperate. You may have somebody in the organization, probably somebody high up in risk, saying, we have to get this sorted immediately right now. We've got a lot of risk. We're not compliant yet. What do you do? How do you get rid of as much risk as possible, as quickly as possible? And this is one of those places where the sorts of things that we've been talking about with the live audits and how that differs from standard audits is really important, because the key thing is, when you're looking at an individual product, there will be those core and non-core user journeys, the things that people really care about and the things that people don't. A normal standard audit will give you high, medium and low issues. But if a high issue is actually on a page that nobody ever goes to, then actually getting rid of that issue, working on that issue and fixing it first is not the best thing to do. It might be better to actually do a medium issue on a page that people go to every single day of the week. You see what I mean here? So it's all about the impact of these things. So we have this thing called an accessibility issue prioritization matrix that we help people understand how to think strategically about prioritization of fixing issues of an individual product. Again, there's loads of great stuff in our training on this for product managers. But again, say if you've got loads of different products and you're thinking, which one should I fix first? How do you kind of deal with that sort of scenario? And so this is where we bring in a lot of our work on governance. We would term all of those products that you have, whether external facing or for staff, as your digital portfolio. And ideally, you would want to be consistently brilliant at accessibility across all of those products. The problem is that most organizations we've ever met start somewhere and then build out in the other direction. So how do you choose what to do first? And this is an example of our kind of portfolio matrix that we use when helping people with this. And the key things here are the words that I've made big. And I learned this when I was at the BBC. What I learned was that if we had loads of products that use the same components and we fix the accessibility of those components, it gets fixed across loads of products. So that's the first thing to do. That's what we termed an enabler. An enabler, if you like, punches above its weight like that. So component libraries, design systems, these sorts of things, massively important. The next thing we prioritized after that was what we termed pillars. So pillars were the websites that most people were using. If you're thinking from a risk perspective, these will be the ones that you think are likely to get you in trouble if you don't make them compliant. So this would normally be your public-facing websites that an ADA troll, for example, could come along and run an automated test on and go, oh, I found some problems with accessibility on that. Let's see if I can extort some money out of them. That's what happens in the States all of the time. For example, they won't be able to get into your customer-facing stuff. If there's a password for it, they won't be able to get into that. So you, again, just think about what's looking external for a start. And then other things that aren't as important or innovations are the things that come next. But this is the sort of way of thinking about things that we want to suggest. So hopefully what we've done now is we've given you a lot to think about. Accessibility, it's not just about WCAG, it's about user journeys, it's about really going beyond that. It's not just about testing, it's about fixing as well. And how do you do this in a way where you're using, if you like, the time and the budget that you've got for accessibility in a really efficient way? So we've got a few moments for questions. Pete, anything in particular that hasn't been answered so far when Yak and I have been sort of taking over from each other and yourself on the chat?
There's been some really good questions in the chat. One of them is, how do you how do you change an organization which just doesn't get it? So they are happy to do audits, but they're not thinking about the testing, they're not thinking about the design. And I think you've answered a little bit of that as the approach.
Exactly. I mean, the key thing, if the organization doesn't get it, I would suggest a live audit with Yak. I mean, literally just show them the experience that people will have. And then seriously, it's the reason why I wanted Yak on this call today. Everybody who comes out of a live audit, he's too modest to say what these do to people, but they depth charge people's heads. They come out of this going, I didn't get accessibility before it. I didn't like accessibility. I didn't want to do accessibility. When they come out of it, they normally say, can we put back the second session for a couple of weeks? Because I now want to fix stuff and then you can test it in the next one. That is the excitement that comes from these live audits. So seriously, yeah, if people aren't bought in, get a bit of Yak. That's what I say.
So there's another question. Sorry, after you, do you want to finish the last question there, Jonathan? Yeah, I've got another question.
I was just going to say, following on from what Jonathan said, some people see accessibility as a thing that you have to do, but actually when you get into it, you'll see that actually it benefits everyone. And it's not a great analogy, but it's one I use often in training. The ramp outside the shop obviously helps people in wheelchairs, let's say, but it helps people who, let's say, got young children with pushchairs and prams. It helps delivery drivers. It represents something to people passing your shop that you care. And often you'll find that more accessible sites are more usable, they're easier to update, they rank better for search engine optimization. And by thinking differently, and that's what accessibility is, it's about thinking about wider people in different demographics, you'll create more innovation. So really the question should be, why won't you do it? And the leaders in brand, the leaders in innovation are all thinking in an accessible way, an inclusive way. So don't think of it as something that you have to do. Think of it as something that you should do to benefit you.
Great. We've probably not got time for any more questions. So there's been a lot of chat in the chat, lots of questions in the chat. So Jonathan, do you want to tell us about what's happening next month?
Sure. So next month, so what you can see is on these webinars, we normally do something that's of kind of strategic kind of use and everybody kind of wants to, but every now and then somebody comes along and says, can you just tell us how to kind of like, code write or how to design write or whatever. And so next month you are getting one module from our developer course. So this is developer course that we've put thousands of people on over the years. They absolutely love it. We've got Usman who runs that course for us with us next month, who's going to be giving you a whole module. So it's 40 minutes of training on something that we thought would be really beneficial to developers, but also to other people who might be on the call as well, which is all about accessible web content and development. So specifically around signposting. So how to do your headings right, how to get other things right in terms of the navigation on pages to make sure that people can get the information. So this is if you like, 1/11 of a course that people absolutely love. If that sounds like it would be something that you or any of your teams would be interested in, then please sign up for next month. I think it's going to be really good. And just a last thing, really, we always kind of end with this way, but I think it's really important. This stuff is complex. We've given you a bigger picture, I think, of compliance than you probably got when you came in. So we'll have asked questions as well as answered them for you. But the thing is, if you stay with us, if you come to all of our webinars, if you've got money and you can afford some of the training that we do, some of the services, the live audits, you can get really good at this. And if you're the person in your organization that wants this to happen, then stick with us, because we're here to try and empower you. And, we believe that with the right sort of, help, you can do amazing things. So thank you so much for your time today. If you have any more questions that you weren't able to get answered and you still want answers to, please contact us on contact@hasselinclusion.com. But thank you so much for your time and attention today. I hope that's been really helpful for you. And yeah, see you next time. And please let us know if there's anything else that you need. Thank you so much. Enjoy your evening.